Now we are.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and start out with a poll, and it's just one question, and I just want to know what kind of animals y'all care for, whether it be a pet or maybe a farm animal, and of course if it's none, you don't have to answer at all, but just so I have an idea what kind of animals y'all come in contact with. And I'll give you guys a few minutes to do that as I start the presentation. So the title of my talk is Can Cows Catch COVID? We're not just going to talk about cows, but I am going to try to talk about a wide variety of animals, and some you may have heard about and maybe some you haven't really heard about, and tell you what we know so far. So just a very quick review. I'm going to be talking about a few different kinds of studies that are looking at either active infection, and we do that through PCR, or a past infection, and we do that through antibody, and some studies that are looking at the receptors on cells that allow the virus in, and those are called ACE2. Okay, so I just want to make sure we know these terms, and so we can have an idea as I'm going through these what those mean. Okay, so it looks like this is pretty much the poll. So very interesting that we have essentially every single animal represented here today, and we only have 22 people on the call. So that's something to keep in mind as I go through this lecture, okay? All right, so this is just a quick little graph to show you. These are the animals that have been reported positive worldwide. That means that they are PCR positive or have active infection in the blue bars here. I don't have as much data on antibody positive showing past infection, but I do have it for the United States for cats and dogs. And so I just want you to visually see the animals that are getting infected most often, and maybe somewhat, and then not as often, okay? And these are the countries so far that have had reported cases, most of them in the United States, Europe, some in Asia, and some in South America, so really around the world. All right, so I'm going to dive into cats first because cats are a fairly common house pet, and we also have, I wouldn't say a lot of studies, but certainly more than some of the other animals that we're going to talk about. So first I'm going to talk about serological surveys. So these are looking at antibodies. Remember, that is looking at the presence of a past infection, okay? So proof of a past infection. So first one, samples out of Wuhan, and these did not just target COVID-19 positive households, but it was from a place where there was a lot of infection and a lot of spread of COVID at the beginning of the year. And we had low numbers, but definitely some evidence that cats were getting infected just through humans spreading COVID, okay? Another study did a random sampling all around China, did not target COVID-19 positive homes, and didn't find any presence of antibodies. So maybe not as widespread as you would think, but remember, China's a big place. So a couple other studies looking at antibody presence. This is a small sample, only 8 cats, but half of them showed presence of a past infection. This is in Canada, and we targeted COVID-19 positive homes in this one. And in this last one, also targeting COVID-19 positive homes, about a quarter of cats were positive, and when they had more lenient criteria, over half were positive. So probably the real infection rate for cats is somewhere in between these percentages, right? But again, you can see that the numbers in these samples are not very high, and that means that we have to consider that. You can't just make really strong conclusions when you don't have a high sample size. So there are also some studies that have looked at active infection in cats. So we'll go through a few of those real quick. This one from Hong Kong looked at 50 cats from COVID-19 positive homes and found about 12% positive with an active infection. Another one, smaller sample size, didn't find anybody with an active infection, but did have some proof of past infection. Okay, a few more, same thing, lower sample sizes, but occasional positives. And again, targeting COVID-19 positive homes. And this one from Italy did not find any active infections, but found a small number of past infections. And lastly, we have some examples of experimental infection. Now that means that we took healthy animals and we purposely put SARS-CoV-2 virus into these animals to see whether or not they could get infected and whether or not they could transmit to a healthy animal. So in that first example there, they did inoculate 3 cats. So they purposely infected 3 cats and put them each with 3 healthy cats. Everybody became actively infected, both the ones that we put the virus there and then the healthy animals that were placed with the infected animals, okay? So that showed proof that the cats were able to pass infection to other cats. They did notice that they didn't shed virus for a very long time, but clearly during the time that those cats were shedding virus, they were able to spread it to healthy cats. Same thing in the study down here. Everybody became infected, both the ones that were purposely infected and the ones that were healthy and placed with those infected. And in both of these, nobody showed illness. So they were infected, but they didn't look sick. And remember that that can happen in people also, right? You can have asymptomatic cases. Okay, a couple more experimental infections. In this one, everybody became antibody positive, so they didn't find active infection, but they found proof that everybody was exposed at some point and their bodies mounted an immune response. And in this last one, a portion of the healthy cats that were placed with the purposely infected cats became infected, again, showing the ability for infected cats to transmit the infection to healthy cats. Another thing from this study, just to let you know that even though they didn't see any illness, when they did necropsies on the cats after the experiment was over, they still saw tissue damage. So not feeling sick doesn't mean that there isn't something happening at the tissue level, at the cellular level, okay? So in all those studies that we looked at, the cats could get infected, but we didn't really see much visual illness. So can they get sick? And the answer is yes, because we do have a few cases of cats that showed illness at the time of infection. However, this particular study talked about 2 examples, and both of them had a few things that we noted about it. So the first one was a 4-month-old ragdoll, and this cat had such severe pneumonia and illness that they could not get her to recover and ended up euthanizing this cat. The second one was a 6-year-old Siamese who just had some mild eye and nose discharge, but when they tested this cat, found out that in addition to having COVID-19, this cat also had feline herpes, which is another upper respiratory virus. So some things to note from both of these. In the first one, the cat with the severe illness that ended up being euthanized was a juvenile. And in some of the past studies that I showed you, when they looked at those tissue samples and found some tissue damage, it was noted specifically in the juvenile cats. So it seems as though age does make a difference in whether or not they show illness. And then for that 6-year-old, the fact that this cat had another kind of virus, how do we know if the clinical signs we saw were due to COVID-19 or were they due to feline herpes? We don't know. Could it have been that the COVID-19 made the immune system low enough that the feline herpes showed itself again? Absolutely. And that's why, we talk a lot about the importance of getting vaccinated for influenza during this time. Having 2 infections at the same time means that you might get sicker, right? Because your immune system is battling more than one thing, okay? And so we saw this with this cat, and we suspect that that's the reason that cat had clinical signs. So can cats infect other cats? So we already talked about experimental studies where we saw that to be the case. And I just want to remind you about the Bronx Zoo example, where 4 tigers and 3 lions tested positive. Based on the timeline, we are pretty sure that a zookeeper infected 1 of the tigers, and then that tiger went on to infect 3 other tigers and 3 lions in the exhibit. So that, I think, is a real world example of cats being able to infect other cats. Can cats infect people? Now, we don't have any proof of this yet. However, the fact that cats can infect other cats means that technically cats can infect people. However, who's going to have the opportunity to bring the virus into the household and infect who first? And the answer is it's going to be way more likely that we will infect our cats, not our cats infecting us, okay? Unless you have an outdoor cat who's mingling with a bunch of other people, which I guess technically could happen. But on that point, everybody who's letting their cat out should try their best to not let their cat out for other reasons as well, but for right now, because that is one way that cats can pick up something, and they can also share it with wildlife and other cats out and about. So keep that in the back of your mind. So take-home message about cats. Do not panic, but don't dismiss the fact that they can technically become infected. And depending on their age, depending on other things they might have underlying, they can actually get sick as well. If you think that you might have COVID, I think you should treat your cat like you treat any other person, and try your best to not expose your cat, okay? All right, next we have dogs. So same deal, a lot of small sample sizes, but I think we can get a little bit of information from these studies. So the first one looked at dogs, 15 dogs specifically from COVID-19 positive homes. There were 2 positives, active infection. Both of them did eventually show antibodies, meaning they cleared the infection and their body, their immune system responded, and they did not get sick. Same thing from these 2 studies here from Spain and from France. In Spain, nobody was positive. They couldn't find any active infection there. And in this last one, no antibody or PCR positives. These next ones did show some infection. So this one, looking at the antibodies in some dogs from France, did show a small percentage of antibody positive dogs. When using a more lenient criteria, a lot more, but still, if you remember the one from cats, still a lower percentage than cats. 20% antibody positive from this sample in Canada. This one, they couldn't find any active infection in 18 dogs in Canada. And this last one, no active infection, but a small number of antibody positive. So looking at all these together, it looks like dogs can become infected, maybe less often than cats. We definitely see signs that their body's immune response responded. But nobody got sick either. Nobody showed illness. So even if they became infected, they didn't look ill, okay? So there are a few experimental infections, just like in the cats. This one was a small sample, and they purposely infected 5 puppies and put them with 2 healthy puppies. And the ones that were purposely infected did show some positivity. Not everybody could they get a positive sample from, but a few of them did. None of the healthy puppies became positive. Same thing with this study here. They saw some antibody response, no illness, could not get a positive on active infection. So take-home message for dogs. They can become infected, but it seems that it's not as easily infected as cats. Doubtful, if at all, that they can become ill, which is good. If they do become positive, it seems as though that it's a very low level of shedding of virus, so it's unlikely that they can infect people, and it doesn't seem like they can infect each other very easily at all. So therefore, they're very unlikely to be a reservoir, and I'm not as worried about dogs as cats, but I still think it's worth paying attention, and certainly if you have COVID, do not cough in your dog's face. There's no reason to do that. All right, next up is mink. Mink, this is a species that you might have heard about in the news, and we'll get to why that kind of blew up in a second. But to start, I'm just going to go over, this is the first example of an outbreak in mink farms in the Netherlands. This is a study that looked at what happened there. And what they saw was that mink very clearly were able to become infected, able to spread it to others on the farm. Some of them did get sick. They had discharge from their nose. Some of them got sick enough where they developed pneumonia and did die. And they even took samples from the environment and found that the air samples in these farms, they could get positives. Okay, so they found presence of virus in the air. And they even tested the cats that were wandering around on the premises and found that a fraction of them showed evidence of past infection. And one of them was positive for an active infection. So this was the beginning. Now here's where we are now with mink and mink farms. So in the Netherlands, over 70 farms affected. They've already killed 1.5 million mink to try and curb the spread. Denmark, it's exploded there. We're up to over 200 farms, and the government even for a moment wanted to cull the entire population. But since then, there's been a lot of pushback, and so they've rolled that back, but they're still very concerned, and they're still trying to figure out how to get this under control. And you can see the other countries that cases are now developing. The last 3 were just in the past week, and I do think that now that Denmark has had such an explosion and it's made kind of headlines, now I think countries are looking more, and when you look, you find. So mink, can they infect people? And the answer is, we're pretty sure yes. So we have a couple of examples. One in particular, actually there were 2 cases in the Netherlands, and what they did was they looked at the timeline and they looked at the DNA profile or the RNA profile of the virus in mink and in the people that became infected after the mink. And they found pretty compelling evidence that a worker brought the coronavirus into the farm, infected the mink, it spread through the mink, and then it spread to other farm workers. So they have 2 different cases in the Netherlands. Then we had cases come out in Denmark, and this is the one that made headlines. And I'll explain why. So with the one in Denmark, they found that there was a mutated strain, which as a side note, mutations happen all the time. Every time a virus or anytime any genetic material copies itself, you're going to have mutations, right? Most of the time it's not a big deal. Sometimes it is, but that's a normal occurrence, okay? But what they noted was that there was this strain that had a mutation in the spike protein on the virus, and that is the protein that is used by the virus to get into our cells, okay? And that is the protein that a lot of treatments and a lot of vaccines use as the thing that tells our immune system what to attack, okay? So just think about this. If you have a vaccine and you, in the vaccine, give it to somebody and ask their immune system to learn, this is what the protein looks like. Now, every time you see it, you attack it and you get rid of it. That's how we train our bodies to get rid of a specific virus, right? Or a specific thing. So if there's a mutation after you've developed a vaccine, what do you think happens to the efficacy of that vaccine, right? So when they saw that there was a mutation in that protein, they got very worried that it would be a mutation that would potentially decrease the efficacy of vaccines and treatments that target that protein, okay? Good news is, as they looked into it more, it does not seem like it is such a big deal. However, this was a bit of an alarm, a bit of a warning call, because maybe this time it wasn't a big deal, but next time it could be. And this is a reminder why it's really important to try to prevent the spread of a virus, in addition to prevent death and illness. We want to prevent the virus being able to make copies of itself, because the more copies a virus makes of itself, the more chance for mutation and the more chance for something bad to come from a mutation, right? So the take-home message about mink. Mink are highly susceptible to infection, to illness, and to death. We have evidence of human-to-mink transmission, mink-to-mink transmission, and mink-to-human transmission. And that's a big deal, because right now that's the one example of animal giving COVID back to humans. Obviously, there's a concern for this virus to become hidden in populations of mink in the wild. Remember that some of these farm mink actually do escape every year and get out into the wild, so they can take that virus with them. And mink farms provide really good environments for transmission, because you have a lot of animals inside an area. You've got dust and air flowing around. So this is a dangerous situation. This is the most worrisome animal that we've talked about so far and that we will talk about. And it's something that we should be seriously thinking about for the future. Okay, on that note, I'm just going to say a few things about ferrets. They are in the same family as mink, but it seems like, according to the experimental infection examples that we have so far, that they are not as susceptible as mink. So, you know, we have a lot of real-world example in mink, and we have a lot of experimental examples in ferrets, and not the other way around. So for ferrets, we have just a couple of studies. And for these, they were intentionally infected, and some of them showed illness. They were able to sustain an active infection, and they were able to pass it to other ferrets, but seemingly not as effectively as mink. Okay, a few more studies, same thing, confirmed what the other ones showed. That they can transmit at a distance if the conditions are right, but not everybody becomes infected in regards to healthy contacts, and it's definitely not as worrisome as mink. Now I'm just going to point out this last study down here. This is one that happened with pet ferrets. So this couple, they were COVID-19 positive, and they have 29 ferrets in the house. And I'm not trying to imagine what that looks like, but you would think that, seeing those experimental infections, you would imagine that at least a few of those ferrets would show some sign of either current or past infection. and they didn't find anything. However, when I read the study, it seems as though it was on the owners to collect the samples, and so I have it saying questionably here, but certainly you would think if it was so contagious like it was in mink, that we would have seen more than what they saw in this house, because you had not one but two people that were symptomatic with COVID-19. So take-home message about about ferrets. They are susceptible to infection, but not as susceptible to mink. They can get sick, but not as severely as mink. They definitely can infect other ferrets, but there's no evidence of them infecting people. And I'm less worried about them compared to mink, but again, we need to pay attention, especially if you have ferrets at home and you think you might be sick. Okay, couple words on hamsters. So there's actually quite a few experimental studies with these guys, because I think they make good lab animals. So we're looking to hamsters as good examples for people. And so we found through these experimental studies that hamsters typically don't show too much illness when they become exposed, but they do become infected. And they do have what I would call subclinical disease. So even though they don't seem sick on the outside, their tissues are affected by the virus. And there are some cases where they looked at whether or not they could transmit to healthy hamsters. And in this one, they didn't have transmission. But there is another study where they did see transmission. And that's in this one here. So I think that it's possible. I think it probably depends on the amount of virus that the hamster gets to begin with. This one actually looked at different concentrations of virus that were given to different healthy hamsters. And it was definitely, there was definitely a correlation between the amount of virus that they got and the severity of the illness, and whether or not they even got infected in the first place. So the take-home message about these little guys: they can become infected, they can develop some mild illness, they can infect each other. No evidence that they can infect people. And I'm not as worried about them compared to cats, but we still should pay attention. All right, couple words on rabbits. So same thing, there's not as many studies on rabbits, just a few, but what they've seen is they can become positive, but it is dose dependent. They don't seem to get sick on visually, but there was some tissue damage underneath, behind the scenes when they were infected. And there was an ACE2 receptor study that does show that lagomorphs, their cells at least have the right receptor to bring in the virus into the cell. So take-home message for rabbits is similar to hamsters. They can become infected. They usually don't show outward illness, but they definitely have cell damage when you look under the microscope, and they probably can infect other rabbits because when they're positive, we are able to get live virus, but we don't really have a lot of good studies looking at this yet. Definitely no evidence that they can infect people, but same as hamsters, still pay attention. All right, what about horses? So horses, we shockingly have the least amount to look at, even though horses are, I think, a fairly popular species of animal. So all I have to show you is a couple of studies that look at those receptors in their cells, whether or not they would be permissible, would let that virus into the cell. And I'm just showing you where horses land in comparison to other animals that we know are able to get infected. So the horses here, and look, all of these in red, we know can get infected. So certainly when you look at this, it seems like horses can get infected. This study shows something similar. Again, they're just looking at that receptor, and the horse has the same susceptibility score as some of these other animals. However, just remember that just because you have receptors that might let the virus in, that's not real life. So, so can horses get infected? The answer is, I don't know. I don't think we have enough information to know for sure. We certainly don't have evidence that it's impossible, but I don't even have take-home messages for you because we don't know enough about horses yet. All right, next, pigs. So there have been a couple of experimental studies, and the good news is that for the most part, it seems like pigs, it's really hard to get a pig infected, okay? So all three of these studies here, they could not get the pigs to become positive. They couldn't get the pigs to show signs that their immune system responded. Nobody got ill. Even though this one did look to see if swine cells themselves would let the virus in, and they found that the cells themselves would let the virus in, none of these studies showed any effect. These two did show a little bit. This one tried different routes of infection, and they did get an active positive infection after putting the virus in the trachea, which is the windpipe, and a little bit of an antibody response with intramuscular and intravenous, putting it in the vein and putting it in the muscle. But still no illness, and that's, these are a lot of effort to try to get an animal infected, and still that's all we got. So, and then in this study, they got a little bit more. So a couple of positives, couple of examples of an immune response, and for a few days, maybe a little bit of eye discharge or nose discharge, but that was it. So take-home message for pigs is that while maybe they can become infected, it's certainly not common. It seems like you have to put a whole bunch of virus in there just to get it to happen. And even in those cases, it seems like it's not that easy for them to share the infection with others. And so I'm not nearly as worried for pigs as I am for some other animals, but I still think we should stay vigilant, because remember that pigs are farmed and pigs are food animals, and we don't need another something damaging the populations. So it's important to stay vigilant and to pay attention. All right, cattle. So first I'm just going to show you that according to this study, looking at that receptor again, whether or not that the cells would let the virus in, cows are kind of, I would say, low to moderate in the ranking, right? So there was a few studies done on cows, experimental studies done on cows. One on actual cattle, and they put the virus on purpose, and they managed to get two cattle to get infected and to have an antibody response or an immune response. But healthy cattle put with the infected cattle, no transmission. This one just looks at the tissues and did show that the tissues were able to take the virus in and let the virus grow, but in real life, it didn't seem as easy to make infection happen. That's all we have for cows, but from that little bit that we have, the take-home message, I think, is that while it does seem like they can become infected, it doesn't seem like an easy thing to do. We still should be paying attention and doing testing and surveilling, because same as pigs, cattle are an important food animal, and they have a lot of contact with people, especially dairy cattle. So it's still valuable to pay attention, even though it seems like not as concerning. What about marine mammals? So we're talking a lot about land animals, but let's not forget our friends in the sea. The thing that's concerning about marine mammals, as you can see from this image here, there are a lot of these species that are endangered to some level, right? Threatened or endangered. So this is a nice image that shows you, they looked at those receptors for a variety of different marine mammals, again, to see if that virus can get into their cells. And the red dot shows that there's a good chance that the virus should be able to get in, right? So it's not proof in real life, but that's what we've got. And they put that on here with what level of endangered they are. And you can see a lot of these red dots are in this region here, and that's not good. So it's worth paying attention. Of the type of marine mammals that seem to have the right receptors, there were types of whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And why do we care? Remember that just because they're in the water doesn't mean they can't get exposed to stuff that we create. And there is obviously a method of transmission through wastewater and sewage. We should be checking on this to make sure, because you know, these populations that are threatened, we don't need to make things worse. And don't forget, we have a lot of captive marine mammals as well that have exposure to people. Birds. So I see a nice percentage of people have chickens. I love a backyard chicken, and the good news is it doesn't seem like they can get infected. So these 3 studies here looked at a variety: chickens, turkeys, ducks, quail, geese, shoved virus everywhere and no infection, no signs of immune response, no illness. So while there's plenty of other things that can affect birds, it seems like for right now, COVID-19 is not one of them. Why do we care to look at birds? Same thing. They're farmed around the world. You have contact between domestic birds and wild birds. And remember, wild birds can travel. So really something to pay attention to anytime you have an infectious disease. All right, I'm not going to say too much about bats, but I just wanted to make a quick point that just because this virus probably came from a bat way back, it doesn't mean that it can now infect bats back again. So this is looking at, again, those receptors in a variety of bats. And the ones with the 2 pluses are the ones that have strong support, meaning that there's a good chance that the virus can get into their cells. And as you can see, there's actually quite a few bats that don't have such a good chance of letting SARS-CoV-2 into their cells. So I just wanted to remind you that I know, you know, maybe there might be some negative feelings about bats after everything that's happened, but I just want to remind you that they're really important for the ecosystem. And so we don't want to hate them, we want to respect them, but we do want to pay attention because they are prevalent everywhere. And they certainly do carry quite a bit of types of viruses. There was one study that looked specifically at fruit bats and did find that they were able to become infected. And one healthy bat was able to become positive when exposed to the infected ones. However, that's one type of bat, and take that for the grain of salt. But I just wanted to make sure that, you know, we don't have too many negative feelings about bats, because they are really important in our ecosystem. And the last group of animals I want to briefly touch on are non-human primates. Can they get infected? And the answer is certainly some of them, absolutely. And not only can they get infected, but some species, especially rhesus monkeys in particular, were able to become infected and become as sick as some humans can become. They had clear infection, definitely tissue damage, and it was a similar pattern to people. So the take-home message on these non-human primates, there are definitely species that are susceptible, and they definitely can get sick, and they, I'm sure, are able to pass it to others. And technically, could they infect humans? Yes, but like I mentioned with other species, the greater chance is us infecting them. And why do we care? It's the same as we talked about with those marine mammals. There are a lot of threatened populations and endangered species. And by us spreading this virus to them, it could certainly decimate and really damage some of these threatened groups. So really important, if for whatever reason you're working with primates, or thinking about the ones that we have in zoos and the work that we're trying to do to improve these threatened populations, it's really important to remember that they are susceptible and they can get very sick and they can die from COVID just like we can. And that's it. So this is my little summary with some really easy to understand pictures. So these are the ones that are highly susceptible to becoming infected. These are the ones that little to, very low. These absolutely not at this point. And this is the group that we still don't know very much and we need more studies. But my caveat message is things are constantly changing. So everything I told you today could completely change tomorrow. So please check for updates. Please keep up to date and on all the COVID information, because we're learning new things every single day. And I know it's frustrating at times because we just want to know all the answers now. We want to know what the right thing is now. And we're doing our best, but there is a lot to learn still. And so just remember to keep checking because things can change very quickly. And with that, I'm finished and I will open it up to questions.
Thank you, Rania. Thank you, Dr. Gollakner, our center coordinator, for this interesting presentation. And I would like to hand the floor over to Costanza Manis, who will take any questions from any of you. And I look forward to an interesting discussion. Thank you, Rania. It was very good.
So I do see a question here. It says, what about pet adoptions? And I think that in the veterinary clinic, I know we're taking the appropriate precautions and we're paying attention. And certainly if any animals that are up for adoption become ill, they're going to be tested for things. But I think that the bigger concern is us getting them sick rather than them getting us sick.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rania. That was incredibly comprehensive of every animal.
I know it was a lot. Yeah.
No, it was great. It was absolutely great. But yeah, okay, we have another one. If you want to read it out, I can read it out for you.
In the cat studies, was there a difference in vaccinated versus non-vaccinated? So what is there, which vaccine? Because we don't have a good vaccine for COVID in cats, but are you talking about another kind of vaccine? Like which, can she unmute herself?
But that, I didn't ask the cat study one though. I was asking about the pet adoptions.
Oh, yep. Mm-hmm.
1 second, sorry, I'm looking for Kitty. I don't think she's here anymore.
Oh. Maybe she got disconnected. Yeah. Well, anyway, they didn't look at vaccinations in cats that I saw. It was, but I'm not sure if she was asking about maybe if they had been vaccinated for some other coronavirus. But no, there was not. There was no attention paid to what vaccinations the cats had.
Okay. Hillary raised her hand. I don't know if that was.
I do. I had a different question that came up after watching this talk, which was really excellent. Thank you. I've been following you and Dr. Kapoor for this long epic journey we've been going through. I look forward to these. And
Good.
I hadn't even thought, about wastewater in reference to sea mammals. And that's so distressing to me to think that that might be a method of transmission. And I just want to scream because it's scary and it's awful. And I just wondered like how viable it is, or if that's like a potential reality,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible. They have found virus in wastewater, but I don't know if there's been a lot of studies on if you're able to get infected and how much you would need, you know what I mean? So,
Mhm.
but I think it's not impossible. And that's
Okay.
why I want to bring it to the attention because, obviously humans are the main transmitters of this virus, but we are not the only ones on this planet. And we need to remember that, like what happened with mink is we didn't worry about mink until all of a sudden we were worried about mink. And they were always a concern. And so are other animals as well. And so hopefully, we get more information soon and we pay attention, because it would be terrible if we didn't find out until it was a problem, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I'm devastated at the mere thought of all of that. And thank you for the nod to the bats too. I still love bats. I don't care that people think bats, whatever. Bats are awesome. Thank you.
Yes. And by the way, because this is a very distressing idea and a distressing talk, and I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but I on purpose put really nice pictures of animals throughout this talk because I didn't want to have pictures of sick cats and dogs and pigs. And so just in case you were like, okay, we're talking about infecting animals and they all look really happy, that's why, because this is already, it's an upsetting idea. And so I wanted to put nice pictures. So
thank you. That softened the blow for me. Thank you.
it's good. That was my goal.
I can go ahead and unmute Kitty now. She's back.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I do wonder as well, but it doesn't, they didn't talk about that at all, so it's definitely something to look into.
Yeah, I was just wondering about that, just curious, since I was listening, and sorry I got kicked out when I tried to unmute.
Yeah.
So,
I think we started with the real basics, like the questions I was asking. Can they get infected? Can they infect others? But hopefully soon.
Yeah, that would be an interesting thing to see if that FERCP, would offer, partial protection. Be interesting to see.
If nothing else, you're going to get the benefit of what I talked about with that one sick cat in the UK. You don't need multiple infections at the same time, because that's going to increase your chances of becoming physically ill from, a virus such as COVID.
Yeah, and as I see Cinda said, the FIP is also a corona. So, I'm just curious. Yeah, okay. Great talk, thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Okay, well, if not, this recording will be up, and I know I put a lot of details in the slides, and I did that so that you could go back and refer to it if you wanted to, and I have a lot of references if you want the reference for any of these. So just shoot me an email, and I'll connect you with those things.
Oh, sorry, we have something else. She doesn't have a question, but a comment. If anyone is interested in studying career status in force.
Carrier status. Okay. Okay, good. Yeah, so if anyone on the call is looking, that's very good. We need more information on horses, for sure.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Gollakner. That was really, really good. And as she said, if anyone has questions, do not hesitate to reach out. And again, thank you for participating in our LenZes seminars. There will be more coming up. So thank you so much all for participating, and I'll see you soon again.
Thank you. And I just wanted to add that we will have our final COVID-19 update seminar on December 14, I think it is. Is that correct,
Yes.
Rania? Yeah, and so during that seminar, we will sort of summarize a little bit about how this year has been and what has happened, and try and put things together. So we look forward to you being there, and thank you for your time and interest in the work we do. So thank you.
Thank you.